Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to take on a reel. It's probably about 10 years old. I remember selling these new. This one's been around a while. It's working. This was part of one of those flea market finds that I did earlier in terms of a video. It's a little noisy. I believe it's a single ball bearing reel with the ball bearing being up in the stack. This is the Quantum Optix 60. As I said, I remember selling these about 10 years ago, so probably hasn't been tuned up in that time. It's had some use, but not doesn't look terribly abused. My guess here is the noise is either a worn bearing or it's just lack of maintenance. And by the look of the stuff that I got in that flea market find thing off of Facebook, a lot of that stuff was lacking maintenance. So if you're true to form, you probably haven't done anything with this particular reel. So this reel is a Quantum. Quantum is part of the W.C. Brady Bradley company. It's Zebco, there's Quantum, there's Finor, and there's Van Staal in that lineup. There's also Rhino and some others. So it's part of a fishing conglomerate now. This one was made in China, and we'll take it apart. We'll show you how it's made, and we'll show you the way to tune this up if you happen to have one of these. So already I'm looking and I'm seeing that there's some pretty old grease in here, so that's probably what's causing the barking going on in this. So we'll start by removing the exterior pieces. I took the through screw out, and you can always notice if the handle is a through screw when you turn, if that button is turning, and it was, it tells you that it's a through screw. Once you remove that, you can pull the handle out. You can take the spool off. And these are solid, dependable reels. They're in the, I want to say, $35, $40 price range, which is moderately priced. This one, I believe, came on a root rod and reel combo, but I could be wrong. Looking up here, there's a little bit of sanding in that going on here. So what that means is we'll take that drag stack off and we'll clean it up just so that it performs efficiently. My guess is this one was used in the surf. Yep, there's sand under here as well, and it may be hard to see, but so we'll make sure that that's cleaned out as well. And then what you want to do from there, you got a couple of options. We can go down below or we can stay up top. I'm going to remove the click rotor and the little shim washer from that. While I'm doing that, I want to just mention a couple of things. You notice I have a protective glove on my hand here. Those of you that watched the video know it's kind of secondary nature to me by now to do just that. And the other thing is that I'm using a parts tray over there. I put all of my pieces and parts in there so that I know where to find them when I go to put the reel back together. And then the last part of it is that you'll notice that I'm taking pictures, and I encourage you to take pictures along the way. If you get stuck, it's always a great reference point, and I do it all the time in terms of taking pictures, and every now and then I have to go back. I just did a video on a Fluger Capital. It was a reel that I wasn't familiar with. I probably made more mistakes than the average bear, but I was able to go back and figure out what was right and what was wrong. So now I'm taking off the rotor. In this case, the rotor's tie-down nut is clockwise. That's normally the way you would put a nut on. So you make a note of that when you're taking it off. If you tried that wrench and you found out that it wasn't moving, don't force it to the over-tightening mode. Try it the other way, because a lot of manufacturers do put that on because that's the way that the reel spins. Okay, well, this is probably confirmed that it hasn't been serviced. We have the original grease piled up here. We have some more sand going on over here. Sand is an enemy of a fishing reel. This one's definitely been out on the surf. And one of the things I'm going to do at some point, I'll stop the video, I'm going to go flush this out with fresh water. That's the best way to do that. We have a little bit up top here as well. But in the meantime, let's just continue along the path here. I'm going to take the bump cap off. That has a little Phillips head screw that holds that in. I like to put the screw in that bump cap just so I don't lose it. And then we'll go for the side plates. You have 4 side plate screws here. take those out. And when I take side plate screws out, I like to lay them on my workbench before I put them into the parts tray, because it's not unusual to have a screw that's a different size, and that's because of the way that they've engineered the side plate. Sometimes it'll skinny down at one part, or it'll get broad at one part, and they'll put a longer or a shorter screw in there. So the screws do need to be identified if there's one that's in a different position. So that's why I do this before I put them into the tray. I've made these mistakes. That's how I pass this along to you. I made the mistake of throwing them in and then finding out that one was too long or too short. These four happen to be the same. I'm going to grab a second tray. That first one's getting awful busy there. So I'm going to just put those side plate screws into that. My trays are simply the bottom of milk jugs. You can kind of use anything you can find, including commercial trays that are made as parts trays. But for me, those milk jugs work just fine. And now we need to separate the case. I'm going to use a little wedge to do that. This one's been stuck for a while. I'm trying to be careful here. It is a razor knife. There we go. So I use this utility knife in its truest sense. It is a utility knife. I use it as a scraper. I use it for things like that, as a wedge, and so on. Okay, so we have at least a 2-ball bearing reel, because here's a bearing here. We have a very dry reel, and that's not uncommon. I see this all the time in terms of reels that come in for service. It's just lack of maintenance most of the time is related to dried grease and the like. I'm taking my Reel X oil, I'm flooding that bearing. One of them's making noise. I don't know if it's that one or the one up top. We'll get up top in a moment. Let's just rotate this so that I can get the shaft out. This is a traditional setup with a crosswind block, big gear, littler gear, smaller gear for the crosswind, which makes the shaft go up and down. Still smaller gear on the pinion that drives the spool round and round. Okay, small piece that removes the axle shaft. As you can see how it's all just shellacked here. Once we remove that, we can take the main gear out, and we can see that we've got our work cut out for us in terms of a little bit of cleaning. So I think this is probably a good time now. As I mentioned before, we're going to stop the video at some point so that I can clean off this sand. But let's go up top. I'll show you the last piece here before we get done with the cleaning part of this. Cleaning takes a fair amount of time, and the issue with cleaning always is that on a video anyway, it's you don't want to watch me do the dishes for 5 or 10 minutes. It's just cumbersome and takes too long. So we'll come back after that. So I want to show you, I'm going to remove this little holder, which is for the anti-reverse. This is not an instant anti-reverse reel. It's one of the reasons why the reel can be made a little bit less expensively. It uses this old eccentric kind of drive off of a spring. Here's where you want to take your pictures. You want to make sure that you know that that's the upside, that's the downside with the slot and the little stud. I take the screw and I put it inside that, just as a convenient holding place when I put it into my tank. Now we have this this little collar, which is your anti-reverse collar. Again, we'll clean that up. Notice the orientation is up. And then we have 2 screws to pull the main shaft out. And then I think we'll probably pause the video, we'll go do the cleaning, and we'll come back. So my cleaning is going to be flushing the rotor assembly out because it's got sand in it. I'll be using a Q-tip and cotton swab, or whatever you want to call those, to bring out a lot of the trapped grease in the case. And here we go. Here's the second part. And here's the noise. You can see this right away. This bearing is just, it's got a lot of rust on it, or dirt. So we'll I'm going to flood that one, not with the oil like we did on the other one, but I'm going to hit this one with a penetrating oil for now, and I'm going to let that sit while I do the cleaning, and that should be able to loosen the debris as well. Okay, I'm going to pause the video here. I'm going to go do some more work, and then we'll come back and we'll see what the results of that are. The last part I'll show you before that pause, the crosswind block can come out. Just grab the stud, pull that out. This is very dry. This will need to be re-lubed, but we take that out to make sure that we've got all the dirt and grease and grime and junk behind that out of the way. Alrighty, that's the portion of the program for now. I'll be back in a few minutes with clean pieces and parts, and we'll go do the reassembly and lubing. So I'm back from doing the chores. We've cleaned it all up. You can see that we don't have the sand anymore embedded in the rotor, nor do we have it in here any longer. And I took the drags out. I probably was off camera for that. We'll show you the sequence when we go to put that back in. Alright, so let's get back to making this reel work better again. And that's the reassembly and the oiling and the lubrication of that reel. So we pretty much cleaned out what we could. We used a series of cotton swabs, paper towels, scraping, the like to make that better. I've cleaned all of the channels in the main pinion gear here, and it's time to lube that up. We'll put that in first now. So I'm using a fishing reel grease. I use Penn Precision reel grease. I recommend that if you're doing your servicing, get the reel greases. They're cheap enough. Don't use don't use general purpose greases or automotive greases or the like. Take the time to go get these. They're available on Amazon. They're cheap enough that you shouldn't have to make a compromise. Alright, we're going to grab the pinion gear. I'm going to get that bearing that's been soaked in WD-40 or one of those types of liquids. I'm going to oil that. I'm going to come up top, and we're going to place that into the carrier. Press down on the bearing. That bearing was held in place by 2 screws. Let's get those screws back in. There's all different types of collars on these bearings. You'll find as you go work on reels, some of them have quite elaborate systems, others just simply hold them in with the screws. This is fine. You just want to make sure that you've got that bearing held down, because the rotor is going to be on there, and if that bearing and shaft weren't held down that way, the rotor would pull that whole assembly right up. Okay, that takes care of that. Speaking of the rotor, we did a nice job cleaning that. I also cleaned the bail assembly while I was at it. So important to note that you need to do a thorough cleaning throughout. We'll give this a spin just to make sure that it's working well. It's a little noisy, and this is what we said is where the noise is coming from. Okay, so we installed that, and then I wasn't happy with it. It was just making too much noise, which means the rust went into the bearing itself. I found a replacement bearing and was able to put that on, and this is a lot more quiet. Okay, so now the next thing up then is to put our anti-reverse cog on there. Then we have our little guide. That's the one that's going to intersect with the ridges on the rotor underneath here. This little point here will click with that rotor. You just want to make sure that you're functional with this. You can see as you pull back, it'll come out, and that'll go into the teeth of the rotor here. So we just want to make sure that that's working properly, and we can reinstall the rotor. And the rotor takes the cap nut. And remember, when we took this off, we took it off in a clockwise, so you have to tighten this on by going counterclockwise with this nut. I like to hand tighten it as much as I can before I turn it over to the wrench. Grab the wrench, finish that. Before we do anything, let's give it a spin. So that's a whole lot more quiet with that replacement bearing there. And clearly that was one of the problems that we had with this. Oops, just noticing the rotor on, I didn't put the hold down for the anti-reverse click. So let's make sure that we go do that. There's a hold down, belongs here. So let's make sure we get that on before we do the rest there. So I'm happy with the replacement of that ball bearing. It makes a big difference there. Let's test this just to make sure that we're... Okay, just testing to make sure that after I installed that screw that the anti-reverse feature was working, which it is. And there is no anti-reverse override on this one. So that's what you get. But it also isn't a clutch-driven anti-reverse system. Okay, we've had this bearing soaking for a while. We'll go ahead and some stuff I picked up on the table here. Go ahead and reinstall that. No tight quarters here. And it has to go in square. There you go. Put that in on there. We can hit it with some real oil. I'm using Real X here. We can grab the other case and the other bearing. Do the same. Oil it up. We can grab the shaft. One of the things I didn't clean apparently. I'll just wipe that down. Get all the old dirt off of that. We can then grab our main gear. We want to make sure that we grease that up good. Grease the teeth. Check those teeth. Make sure that there's no extraordinary wear on them or that they're not chipped or cracked. Also check the secondary set of teeth here. That's going to drive the crosswind block. I'm going to grab that crosswind block while I have my brush out here. Make sure we get some grease on the teeth there and on the surface. Put that crosswind block in. When you put the crosswind block in, make sure that the stud is low. Grab the, that's the crosswind gear. Here's the crosswind block. Same thing. Make sure that you get some grease on the back and some grease in that channel. Slip that on over the stud. And you can put your main gear in. A little bit on that shaft there from the grease standpoint. That's going to ride inside the bearing. A little bit on the grease on this one as well, where it's going to ride inside the bearing. Then you can install. Make sure it's properly seated. And then you can take your axle shaft and just want to line that up with your crosswind block. Sometimes easier said than done. There we go. When you see the hole through, you can center that hole. I use a little pin. I'm looking for the small flathead screw now. And that's the internal setup for this reel. Last piece then is just putting the case on here. Already lubed the bearing. Snap it in place, nice and tight seal. 4 case screws. And when I put case screws in, I like to go north, south, east, west. Folks that watch this channel have heard me more than once say that. I just don't like to go in a circular pattern where you can put stress on a case, particularly a case like this, which is a plastic or a graphite case. I also have discussed before, I don't like using mechanical screwdrivers on these because those screwdrivers have a lot of torque, and if you're not careful you can split the case. So it's kind of hard to over torque with your hand screwdriver and hand strength, so I kind of prefer to do that. I also enjoy working with my hands, so it makes it a little bit easier to do it that way. Alrighty then, last of the case screws. Probably need the next size on the screwdriver. It's always nice to have your tools close at hand so that if you do need them, you don't have to drop the project to go do it. We have a bump guard here. Bump guard screw. And as I'm looking, I still don't have that last screw there tight. There we go. Missing a turn. Next up then, I have that little hold fast for your rotor nut. That'll just keep it from slipping as the reel rotates. Sometimes you'll pick up a reel and it'll have the line that's all in like a figure 8 shape or something. It's certainly something you've never seen before. Usually that's the result of that rotor cap screw being loose, and that'll cause the rotor to rock side to side in an unusual line pattern. Alright, and we have our click rotor, which is the noise it makes when the drag is spinning. Line rotor and little shim washer. And then we're over here to the washers themselves. Next up then is to put the washers into the spool. I know you didn't see me take these out, but this actually starts with an eared washer. Just got to get those tabs lined up. And it has the flat washer, round washer, these have all been cleaned, round washer, eared washer. And make sure these ears fit in the channel. Another one of the fabric washers, and these are hard plastic washers, so you don't need to put any lubrication on them. And we're just kind of alternating the sequences here. Last of the hard washers. Last of the pieces. Now we have this little clip that holds it all in. That clip, just, you want to get one side of that clip in. It is a spring clip, so be careful as you put it in that it doesn't shoot. Work it around so that both sides wind up in the groove. And that's the proper installation of the drag stack. Okay, we install the spool. We have that drag knob adjuster. Tighten that down, make sure that that's holding. tight. All that's left then is the handle. The handle screw. And a test drive. We'll see if we've quieted it down at all here. I suspect that bearing was what the issue was there. Yeah, we're back to a normal functioning reel now without all that bearing noise. And nice reel ready to go. So it's a 3-ball bearing reel, one on each side of the main post and one up top. The bearing up top was barking. It was probably because of the rust in there. We saw that as we cleaned that reel off. And there was some sand in there, so we took care of all of the cleaning on that. And now we've got a Quantum Optix 60 that's ready to go back fishing. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you did, please subscribe to see more. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.